The perfect little girl in the pageant crown was already dead inside her own home. This is the image seared into the collective consciousness of a nation, a 6-year-old beauty queen lying in the basement of her family's sprawling Boulder, Colorado, home on Christmas night, 1996. But behind the gloss of television news reports and the haunting, smile-heavy photographs was a labyrinth of human tragedy, forensic missteps, and a mystery that, to this day, refuses to be neatly solved. Her name was JonBenét Ramsey, a child whose life was a curated picture of Southern belle charm, coached to twirl and smile on a stage, only to have her story end in the most brutal and bewildering of ways. In life, JonBenét was the embodiment of her parents' ambitions. Patsy Ramsey, a former West Virginia beauty queen herself, had poured her own faded dreams into her youngest daughter. The result was a child who was both a real little girl and a living doll. We see her in home videos, her blonde hair bouncing, her eyes sparkling with a mix of innocence and coached poise as she performed in elaborate costumes. Her father, John Ramsey, was a successful businessman, the kind of man who had built an empire from the ground up and provided his family with a 6,000-square-foot Tudor home on an idyllic street. It was a picture of American success: the handsome, wealthy parents, the charming son, Burke, and the dazzling little sister who was the glittering center of it all. But that picture was a facade, a stage set that would soon be shattered. The morning after Christmas, that perfect world collapsed into chaos. Patsy Ramsey's frantic 911 call, her voice a piercing wire of pure panic, shattered the holiday quiet. "We have a kidnapping," she gasped. "There's a note. It says, 'Listen carefully. We are a group of individuals that represent a small foreign faction.'" The note was bizarrely long, a rambling 3-page manuscript filled with movie villain bravado, demanding a ransom of $118,000, a strangely specific sum that chillingly matched John's recent bonus. It ended with a dramatic "Victory, SBTC." The police arrived, treating the scene as a kidnapping. The house was large, confusing, a maze of rooms and levels. For hours they waited, expecting a call from the kidnappers that never came. The atmosphere was thick with a dreadful, waiting anxiety. Then, in a fateful twist, John Ramsey and a family friend decided to do a more thorough search of the house. It was John who ventured into the rarely used basement, who pushed open the door to a small, windowless room, and whose flashlight beam fell upon a terrible sight. There was JonBenét, wrapped in a white blanket, a piece of duct tape over her mouth, a garrote, a crude noose tightened around her neck. The wail of anguish that escaped John Ramsey was the sound of a world ending. In an instant, the investigation transformed from a kidnapping to a homicide, and the Ramsey home, the scene of the crime, was catastrophically compromised. Friends, family, and even the distraught parents wandered through the house, contaminating potential evidence. The Boulder Police Department, more accustomed to college misdemeanors than a brutal child murder, was immediately out of its depth. The ransom note, left on a staircase, was handled without gloves. The body was moved. Every procedural error that could be made was made. And all eyes, slowly, turned inward, towards the family. The note itself was the first great red flag. Written on a notepad from inside the house with a pen found in the house, it was a theatrical piece of fiction. It was too long, too practiced, its tone veering from threatening to almost sympathetic. It felt like a performance. Detectives noted the lack of forced entry, the undisturbed spiderweb in a basement window, the eerie quiet of a house that supposedly hosted a violent intruder. The evidence on JonBenét's small body was confounding, a puzzle of conflicting clues. The official cause of death was asphyxia by strangulation associated with craniocerebral trauma. She had suffered a massive blow to the head that would have rendered her unconscious, and the garrote had been applied later. The pineapple found undigested in her stomach, a snack no one could recall her eating that night, became a tiny, pivotal detail. Suspicion fell like a shroud upon the Ramseys. Patsy's handwriting was a close but not perfect match to the ransom note. Her over-the-top public grief was analyzed and criticized. Could a mother, a pageant queen, have flown into a rage over a bedwetting accident, striking her daughter too hard? Could a father, in a panic, have staged a horrific cover-up to protect his wife? Or perhaps something even more unthinkable? The media seized upon the narrative, trying the family in the court of public opinion. They were too calm, they were too emotional, they lawyered up too quickly. John and Patsy Ramsey, once the picture of success, became pariahs, living under a cloud of presumed guilt. Their son, Burke, then 9 years old, was also scrutinized. Could a child have inflicted the head wound, with the parents then staging the rest of the scene to protect their only remaining child? The theories multiplied, each more dark and convoluted than the last, turning a family tragedy into a national obsession. For years, the case stagnated. A Cold War between the Boulder District Attorney's Office, which was increasingly skeptical of the parents' guilt, and the police, who were convinced an intruder was a fantasy. The Ramseys maintained their innocence with a steely, if strained, resolve, giving interviews, writing a book, their lives defined by the shadow of that one night. Patsy, fighting a losing battle with cancer, would never see the case resolved. She died in 2006, her name still stained by suspicion. The case seemed destined to remain a forever open file, a classic American unsolved mystery. Then, a decade after the murder, a stunning development offered a glimmer of resolution. In 2006, a bizarre twist emerged from the shadows. John Mark Carr, an eccentric schoolteacher, was arrested in Thailand after claiming, in lurid detail, that he had been present at JonBenét's death. He called it an accident, but his knowledge of the case seemed unnervingly specific. For a few breathless days, it seemed the mystery was solved. The world watched as Carr was extradited, the gaunt, peculiar man appearing on every screen. But the climax of this particular drama was not a confession, but a collapse. Carr's DNA did not match the unknown male trace found on JonBenét's clothing. His story was a fantasy, a sick fabrication constructed by a disturbed man seeking notoriety. The hope for a quick and easy answer evaporated, leaving the public with the same old, wearying questions. The real turning point, the true climax of the investigative saga, came not with a bang, but with a scientific whisper. Advances in DNA technology finally allowed for a more sophisticated analysis of the minute traces found mixed with JonBenét E.'s blood on her long johns. This was not touch DNA, but a more substantial profile from the inner seam of her clothing, evidence that pointed unequivocally to an unknown male, a stranger. This was the hard evidence that the intruder theory had always lacked. In 2008, based on this new forensic certainty, then Boulder District Attorney Mary Lacey took the extraordinary step of exonerating the entire Ramsey family. In a public letter to John Ramsey, she wrote, "The Boulder District Attorney's Office does not consider your immediate family, including you, your late wife, Patsy, and your son, Burke, to be under any suspicion in the commission of this crime." For John and Burke, it was a vindication they had waited 12 agonizing years to receive. The monster, it seemed, had been in the house that night after all. Yet, even with science pointing toward an unknown assailant, the case remains maddeningly open. The ransom note, so personal, so bizarrely crafted, still feels like it was written by someone with intimate knowledge of the family. The lack of forced entry, the strange timeline, the conflicting evidence, none of it fits a clean narrative. We are left with an unresolved chord, a story with a conclusion that satisfies no one. JonBenét Ramsey is frozen in time, a 6-year-old in a sequined costume, a symbol of beauty, wealth, and the terrifying fragility of the world we build for our children. Her story is a ghost that still haunts the American landscape, a reminder that some doors, once closed, can never be fully reopened. The echo of that tiny, broken voice in the pageant spotlight is a sound that can never be unheard. If stories like this keep you hooked, hit subscribe for more.